Freighter refiners. I mean, we all know they're irreparably broken, right? You put stuff in, they disappear, sometimes instantly. You go away, you come back, the stuff isn't in there. Sometimes they just seem to get stuck in a loop where stuff that's in them stays in there, and you take it out and you go away and you come back and the stuff is still in there, which some people love because it gives them lots of extra resources, but of course it ties up a refiner and it's not doing what it's supposed to do. And then there's these things, stellar extractor cores. They seem to do similar things. You go to them, you hope that they've extracted some materials from the system they're in, and they just haven't. Or they have got exactly the same number as they had before when you last looked. In general, these things seem to be broken. And that's irreparable, right? I mean, everybody's just given up with them and they've all gone on their merry way and said, well, we're just not using them. Or if we're going to use them, we're going to nurse them. We're going to stand there and we're going to watch them refine. We're going to take the stuff out. We're going to put the stuff back again over and over. And we're just going to spend time in front of our refiners. Well, this isn't actually true. They are repairable. And the reason I know this is because I've been struggling with this issue for years now. Ever since I got my first freighter. And, I mean, I haven't been playing this game from scratch, and freighters were already existent when I started playing, but this was an issue from the very beginning, and it still remains an issue. And there is a trick to it. There is a way to stop this happening, and a way that you can put stuff in your refiner and be sure that it's going to work, go away, do stuff, come back to your freighter, and it will be there. It will be properly done, or it will still be refining depending on how long you've been away and how long the process is, and everything will work. But it involves knowing what's going on in the but this involves, hey, could you stop walking through me? But this involves understanding what's going on underneath the hood. The other things that could potentially not work okay is growing stuff in your freighter. And as long as the room is powered, then theoretically things should grow fine. But sometimes they don't. Sometimes you come back and you look at them and they're just still small, and you scan them, and instead of saying a growing time, it just says infinity, because it's not going to grow at all. Strangely, I've never had a similar problem with nutrient processors, but I don't know, maybe some people have. So what's the solution? Well, first of all, we need to understand what's going on under the hood in the real world that freighters exist in, which is space. So here we are out in space. We're near a planet, and we're not far from the space station. And our freighter is just happily sitting somewhere in the middle, not far away from those things. And there's a reason for this. I used the hyperdrive in my freighter to warp into this system. And it's not going to place me miles out next to nowhere. It's not going to place me next to that planet over there. It's going to place me next to the planet that's closest to the space station, somewhere near the space station. And it does this for a good reason. There's probably a specific spawn point for each system where the freighter can actually be spawned when you send your freighter in. And that's useful to know because when we build parts, every part has a position. It's defined by its position, like many, many other things in the game. And whenever we're building in the freighter, we are setting a thing into a specific position. But then imagine what happens when we do this. We've just moved the whole freighter, and then when we go inside, it respawns the freighter and all of the things inside it into a new position. And that really shouldn't be a problem. But the accuracy of the positions that it's spawning all the parts into can be thrown out because you could position your freighter anywhere, at any distance from the space station. You could even spawn it just inside the atmosphere of a planet. If you're standing on a planet and call it in, very often it seems to be just inside that barrier where the atmosphere is. You could go out and start looking for things like derelict freighters and then respawn your freighter out in the middle of nowhere. many, many units away from the space station. And you could have this at any angle and orientation. And every time you do that, you're introducing a variable into the system that means that everything you build is not necessarily going to be in exactly the right place. So let's say I went into the freighter now and started building some rooms. Can we guarantee that those rooms are going to be perfectly aligned with the existing rooms? Well, yes and no. Let's say we wanted to build another room out here. Snaps fine. There's a window in the way, but we can put a door in there. That snaps fine. It's perfectly functional. We can walk in and out. But anybody that's watched any of my videos knows that we can manipulate snap points. We can position things such that they open and close. And there's a slight tolerance for how far away the snap point is when we build things. If we position things manually, just as I was doing the other day in my scaling video when I was scaling cuboids, I positioned things manually and they opened the door. And there's a very, very small tolerance of where exactly you can position a part in order for those snap points to work. So it's no great achievement that we can build when the freighter is in any position. It's just using snap points. The difficulty comes from things like refiners and how they actually work out which refiner you're using and what's in them. And we can't guarantee that when we call in our freighter at an odd angle, at an odd position, especially if it's been built while at an odd position, we can't guarantee that the game is going to recognize the refiner as the same one that we already used. And what I think happens when we go to use a refiner and nothing's in there is that that refiner has budged slightly, very slightly, but just outside the tolerance of that particular refiner. So it thinks it's empty, and it is possible to get it back again. Sometimes you reload and the things appear again. Sometimes you think, oh, I've lost that, and you just give up refining, and then 2 days later you come back to use the refiner again, and the stuff's suddenly in there because you've repositioned your freighter and it's now better aligned with the position it was in. So I think this is what is happening under the hood. Now, it's just a theory, or it was to start with, but I've been spending a very, very long time working on this, trying to make sure my refiners work. And my tactic to make sure they do work is to always do specific things when I'm building. So first off, if I'm going to build in my freighter, I warp to a system. And I do this because I know that if by warping to a system, I'm going to position the freighter in a place where the game itself is happy to render the freighter. Now, I'm assuming, and it does seem to be borne out by my experience, that it's always going to be in exactly the same relative position in any system, and that everything else moves around me. So, for instance, the planets won't be in exactly the same position, and the space station won't be in exactly the same position, but my freighter will be. It's in what we can think of as an origin point. It probably isn't the origin point. I would imagine the space station is the origin point, but it's an origin point as far as we're concerned for building. So, secondly, if I'm beginning a new freighter build, I start from scratch, and I always start with this door. I delete everything that's already here, and I start here on this particular room, and I make sure everything that attaches to this room is only ever built at that set position in the system. So I warp into a system, and then I start building from my existing places that I've already built. I never call my freighter into a system and start building. That would be really dangerous. and it would potentially cause the issues that I'm describing. Thirdly, if I ever have a refiner that starts playing up in any of those ways, I completely rebuild them. This is why in my freighters, I tend to have my refiners and my stellar extractors reasonably close to my entrance. That way I can start from scratch. So let's show you what I would do. I would walk completely out of the area. I would go into the build menu. I would start deleting the parts that are playing up. I'd probably try and get a bird's eye view. And I would delete everything that could potentially be attached to that space. Right back to the entranceway. So you'll notice that I'm stood in this one. I knew I wasn't going to delete that one, but I was going to delete everything from this doorway and a clear path to where I'm going to build. And we're going to be using some industrial parts. So to start with, planning out what I was doing, I had a technology space. Then I had a teleport chamber. Have a quick look which way it's orientated. Yep, that's the right way that it had. Oh, I've got myself stuck. Then I would use I had an no, not an appearance modifier. What did I have? I had the scanner room just here. And then I went into an industrial area and I had 4 refiners. Now if I was being super picky, I would want to delete that room as well. I'm not going to for this instance, but I'd like to completely clear the area. I'd probably even delete this room, so nothing else could potentially be snapping. But I have rebuilt this in the past, so I know roughly where I am. And then I had my stellar extractors. And I had a few walls in there, which I'm not showing you now. And that's how I would go about fixing a refiner issue. And from that point on, I would only ever use my refiners after warping to a new system. So I would warp to a new system, I'd fire up my refiners, get them doing stuff, and then I would be free to go wherever I wanted. I could start exploring. I'm currently exploring this area of space for ships, and I could happily do that. Fly around, check out ships, go to space stations, etc. And it wouldn't disrupt anything. I could even call in my freighter into those positions. As long as when I actually wanted to go back to my refiners, I warped my freighter to a new system before going back to them. Now, even then, occasionally, I will come to a system and my refiners will appear empty. They'll have that purple symbol as I walk in this door, even though I know I left them running. But all I have to do is hit save, reload my save, and they will be in a different state. They'll either be running or they'll be in the light blue state, meaning that I've got stuff to collect. And that has worked for me consistently for months. And I've never had a problem since I started using this method. Or rather, every time I ever do have a problem, which has been very rare, I blitz the whole thing. I delete it all, go back to that thing and make sure everything's in exactly the right position. Because I don't want any possibility of any budging. On this save, I've occasionally had to do that, and I suspect it's because I'm reluctant to remove a few of the rooms surrounding. On my permadeath save, which I'm much more focused on, I built everything using this method. The entire base was built from scratch, starting from the door in a parked position that I moved into by warping in my freighter. And I've never had a problem there, ever, for anything I've ever tried to do. I will quite happily, in my daily routine, set up my refiners, visit all of my different bases to pick up resources, come back, and my refiners will be happily either still ploughing on or be ready for me to pick stuff up. Or I'll leave them overnight and I'll come back in the morning, reload, everything will still be there. I have never had to do anything unusual or different. They just work. It's because I stick to this simple routine. I keep my freighter parked in that central point of the system, and I only ever use my refiners when I'm in that central point in the system, and I only ever build when I'm in that central point in the system. I hope this helps. Give it a try. Let me know if it doesn't work. As I say, I've had some mixed results, but very, very occasional mixed results. It may not be a panacea, but it seems to work for me, and I hope it works for you. So, goodbye for now. Goodbye.